did Edomites destroy both of Jerusalem's temples. Not the Babylonians, not the Romans. So who destroyed Jerusalem's temples? If you ask 99% of Bible scholars who destroyed Solomon's temple and the second temple, also known as Herod's temple, you will hear it was the Babylonians in 538 BC and the Romans in AD 70. However, modern scholars are beginning to wonder if it was someone else embedded in the Roman and Babylonian armies who actually did the destroying. This is pretty amazing and very important information that will significantly impact our view of prophecy. Bible scholar and end-time teacher Joel Richardson did the research that implicated Syrians and Arabs in the burning of Herod's temple in AD 70. And just this year, Richard Friedman published an article in Academia pointing out that it may have been the Edomites, who are Syrians and Arabs after all, that burned the first temple. Are these theories correct? And what are the prophetic implications if Edom was responsible for burning both temples? That's what we're talking about today, and we're starting right now. Before we look at this issue, we need to give a shout out to one of our channel's advisors, Fisher Man, who uncovered some of this information. You're probably thinking, this idea though is crazy. The destruction of the temples did take place during the Babylonian invasion and during the Roman invasion, and we agree. But those forces that came against Jerusalem weren't homogeneous. They weren't all Babylonians or all Romans. The Romans conscripted soldiers from all over its empire, from many nationalities. And the same can be said for the Babylonians. We know for certain that Edomites were present in both sieges of the city. So we need to begin with the premise that Edom could have burned both temples because they were present. Now, we need a lot more proof than that, because simply being present is not enough. You might ask, doesn't the Bible say Rome destroyed Herod's temple in AD 70? And the answer to that is it doesn't. Jesus prophesied about the destruction of a temple, but the actual destruction isn't mentioned anywhere in Scripture, as every book of the New Testament other than Revelation was written prior to AD 70, and Revelation doesn't mention it at all. You might ask, didn't Daniel prophesy that the people of the prince who is to come destroyed Herod's temple in AD 70? That's found in Daniel 9:26. And weren't those the Romans? Well, some might have been Romans, but many other nationalities were present as well, as we learn in Joel Richardson's book, Mideast Beast. He quotes Josephus, who tells us Titus came by land into Syria, where he collected together the Roman forces with a considerable number of auxiliaries from the kings in that neighborhood. He also quotes the Roman historian Tacitus, who tells us that in addition to the legions gathered in Syria, this force was accompanied by a strong contingent of Arabs who hated the Jews. So historians show the Roman legions included Edomites from Syria, and that additional forces not included in the legions from this area also joined the battle. So Edomites were present in the Roman army in very large numbers. But how large? Nigel Pollard, PhD, professor of Roman history at Oxford, and Richardson together calculated that approximately 90% of the army that attacked Jerusalem in AD 70 were Eastern and non-European. Therefore, the overwhelming majority of the Roman army were Easterners. But were these Easterners the ones that burned the temple? And were they Edomites? Josephus tells us how the fire started, quote, at which time one of his soldiers, without staying for any orders and without any concern or dread upon him at so great an undertaking, and being hurried on by a certain divine fury, snatched somewhat out of the materials that were on fire, and being lifted up by another soldier, he set fire to a golden window. After the fire in the temple began, Josephus tells us that the messengers ran to Titus, the Roman commander, to tell him the temple was burning. Titus was infuriated and ran to the temple and ordered the fire to be put out, but they were unsuccessful. But this shows that the leadership of the Roman army was opposed to destroying the temple. Interestingly, Josephus also contends the soldiers didn't try too hard to stop the fire because the Easterners, the Edomites, hated the Jews, and that hate exceeded their fear of the Roman commander. That is indicting. We cannot know with certainty that an Edomite lit the fire that burned the second temple, but the odds are it was. At least a 90% chance given the makeup of the army, and given that the soldiers did so without fear of reprisal, the odds are that it was much more likely to have been an Edomite than a Roman who would have feared his commander. And the Edomites likely then burned the second temple. But what about the first temple, Solomon's temple? Again, you might ask, hey, wait a minute. Doesn't Scripture clearly say Babylon destroyed Solomon's temple? And in this case, yes, it does. It also says Edom did it, as you will see in just a moment. How could those both be true? Just as we saw in the case of the second temple, the main army can be indicted, but the actual burning could be the responsibility of another. So we shouldn't be dogmatic about this until we look at the evidence. We need to investigate this closely, as something more might be going on that can be seen on the surface, just as in the second temple. But if Edom was responsible, this may explain in part why God is planning to punish the Edomites so severely on the day of the Lord. Look what it says in Isaiah. For my sword has drunk its fill of the heavens. Behold, it descends for judgment upon Edom, upon the people I have devoted to destruction. And in Obadiah we read, the house of Esau will be as stubble, and they will burn them and consume them, and there will be no survivor for the house of Esau. And later in Obadiah we read, will I not on that day, declares the Lord, destroy the wise men out of Edom, and understanding out of Mount Esau, and your mighty men will be dismayed, O Teman, so that every man from Mount Esau will be cut off by slaughter because of the violence done to your brother Jacob. Shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. No other nation is as clearly designated by God for total destruction as Edom is. Now, who are the descendants of Esau, Jacob's brother? Several famous Edomites were villains in the Bible. Haman, who planned to annihilate the Jews in the book of Esther, was a descendant of King Agag. He was an Edomite. And King Herod, who famously killed the babies in Bethlehem in an attempt to kill Jesus himself, he was an Edomite too. Who are the Edomites today? We know from Genesis that Esau married 3 women, 2 Hittite women, and one of the daughters of Ishmael. Esau went to Ishmael and took as his wife, besides the wives he had, Mahalalel, the daughter of Ishmael. Hittites were from the region of Turkey and western Syria. Ishmaelites are today's Arabs. So in combination, Edomites are probably best thought of as those living in Middle Eastern Islamic nations. And these are the people we believe may have burned both of the temples. Remember, Lord, the Edomites with the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it to its foundation. If it was only the Babylonians who destroyed the temple, why are the Edomites there? And why are they calling for the destruction of Jerusalem? And in the non-canonical book of 1 Esdras, we see you have vowed to build up the temple, which the Edomites burned when Judea was made desolate by the Chaldeans. Although not scripture, this is history. And the Israelites definitively thought Edomites burned the temple when the Chaldeans or Babylonians attacked. Then in Jeremiah chapters 39 to 41, we run into this problem. In his work, Friedman cites the description of the murder of Gedaliah in Jeremiah 41, which took place 3 months after the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, described in chapter 39. Now, 2 days after the murder, the killers encounter a large group on their way to the temple. The second day after Gedaliah was killed, when no one yet knew about it, 80 men came from Shechem, Shiloh, and Shumarong, their heads shaved, their garments torn, and their bodies gashed, carrying meal offerings and frankincense to present at the house of the Lord. This event presents a real difficult question of why people would be bringing offerings to the temple after it had been destroyed 3 months earlier. Obviously, they weren't. Most likely the temple was destroyed later, after the city was destroyed, and simply presented as being destroyed with the city in a summary statement. A statement that included a longer period of time than just a couple of days. Friedman suggests the temple was burned by Edomites months after the destruction of Jerusalem and its walls by the Babylonians, and that the Bible attributes it to the Babylonians because the Edomites were embedded in their army. So the destruction happened during the Greater Invasion, which took months, but the ethnicity of those burning the temple was Edomite. It's an interesting theory. But returning to the one Bible verse we do have about the destruction of a second temple in Daniel 9:26, doesn't it say the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and temple? And again, weren't those Romans? Well, if the people who destroyed the city and temple were Romans, then the prince who is to come will be a Roman. And if the people were Arabs and Syrians, as suggested in this video, then the prince who is to come will likely come from that region. That is Joel Richardson's argument. But what if the people of the prince isn't talking about a nationality at all? Have you even considered that possibility? What if this verse is speaking of agency, not nationality? In other words, it is the people or army of the prince who is coming to destroy the city and temple, not the prince himself. If the prince is away from the city but sends his army, then they are his agents. Therefore, the prophet Daniel is possibly saying it this way to show the prince doesn't destroy the city on his own, that he simply orders its destruction from far away and sends his armies to do it. In this way, the people of the prince who is to come can be from multiple nationalities: Romans, Syrians, Arabs, and even Jews. The Jews, after all, were ultimately responsible by revolting. Josephus blames them directly. So it is all the people who joined to destroy the temple. Now, what sort of prince would have all these people under his command in AD 70? Well, for one, Jesus. To which you might say, excuse me, Jesus isn't an evil prince whose people destroy the city and temple. No, he is God. But in Matthew 22:7, we learn it is God himself who sent the armies to destroy Jerusalem. The king was angry, and he sent his troops and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. The king in this parable Jesus told is King Jesus. It was his armies that destroyed the city. It was at his command. I'm sure that caused you to pause and think, is it possible that the prince who is to come isn't the Antichrist at all, but rather is Jesus? How could this be? Well, challenge yourself and your beliefs and click right here to keep watching and discover the biblical evidence that no one talks about that proves the prince who is to come is Jesus. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.